We are pleased that you took some time to come and be with us and engage in a conversation that we hope will make our city a livable city. I just want to say right from the start that CCAP is a project of the board of Carnegie Community Center Association. CCAP works mostly on housing, income, land use issues in the downtown east side. And this debate was organized to focus on the downtown east side. We will be looking at Chinatown, Hogan's Alley, and this community where we live and work. This afternoon, we have invited 9 candidates for mayor and councilor. And there was an adjustment at the far end. Alicia wasn't able to make it, but Peter stepped in. Fred stepped in. And
so why couldn't I step in on here?
Yes, we also want to acknowledge 3 people who were not able to make the panel. And this is Royal Girl, please stand up, who's running for the mayor. John Yano. Thank you. So how?
I've got a question.
Yes.
Why were the other 2 or 3 not included in the panel?
We have very limited time. And
But it's called an all candidates meeting.
Yes. Please bear with us. Everybody
Well,
will
no,
have.
it says all candidates.
Thank you very much.
All candidates.
So we have 2 hours. We hope to be finished by 4:30. And just so you know, we're going to start territorial acknowledgement. And we'd like to invite Eldon residents to do this territorial.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Leslie Nelson. I'm from the Kwatuak, Lukau, Kuskamook. I got permission from Carlene Thomas from Slaywood Youth and Sam George from Musqueam, Amos and Sage White from Musqueam. I'd like to welcome you to this event, acknowledgement of the Coast Salish unceded territory of the Squamish, Slaywood Youth in Musqueam. Aho, Gagakasla. I hope you all do well in proper questions and everything. My hands up. Yes.
Thank you very much. So I want to go over quickly the rules. We'll have 2 minutes to answer each question, with the exception of answer with 1-word question. And there will be a 15 seconds after the allotted time, there will be a clap down. So this clap down is meant to send a signal to the speaker that time is up. And so please, when we announce the 15 seconds, close down your remarks. There will be a timekeeper who will warn the candidates. Jessica, please stand. And she'll warn the candidates with regards to the time. There will be 30 minutes, 2 minutes, clap down at 2:15. Candidates may respond to other candidates with the allotted 2 minutes time to answer questions. And questions will not be provided beforehand, but will focus, as I said, on issues pertaining to downtown east side, Chinatown, and Hogan's Alley. So to begin, I'd like to Welcome. I'd like to introduce candidates. So we have Hector Bremer, Yes Vancouver. Rebecca Bly from NTPA. Brandon Yan, One City. David Chan, ProVancouver. Pete Fry, Green Party. Shauna Sylvester, Independent. Jean Swanson, Stewart, Independent. And Fred Hardy, Vancouver, We're going to start with a question from Sika. Renee?
They went upstairs, I think.
Could I take my space?
No, this is all good.
Who's the next question?
Maybe I can read the question. Is that okay? Or someone?
Go to the next.
All right. The question says, residents in the downtown east side are subjected to increased violence, surveillance, and police violence each and every day. Poor, racialized, and trans community members are victims of police brutality, causing people to fear big police. If you are elected, what will you do to end police violence, hold the Vancouver Police Department accountable, and build community safety? Sorry. My bad. I want to ask candidates to do a 2-minute intro. And we're going to start with Hector.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, there is a microphone. Hello. Yes, you can hear me? Okay, sorry. So, my name is Hector Bremner. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to our Indigenous hosts for having us here on their land. And thank you for taking your time out of your day to making this a priority. Not enough people do. Not enough people participate in democracy. And of course, if you're not at the table, you're on it. So thank you for participating. And I'm honored to be here. I'm an elected Vancouver City Councillor, and now I'm asking your permission to be your mayor. And I have a team of people with me that are ready to fix Vancouver. It is an opportunity, an historic opportunity in this election, as we've seen the traditional parties and these entrenchments of politics as usual fall away. There's an opportunity for us to do something really exciting. And not make this an election about a lot of the old fights, the left and the right, but make it really about us as a people coming together, shoulder to shoulder, and fixing our city. The downtown east side is obviously something that we've allowed, and the politics of usual in Vancouver has allowed to get out of control, and it's hurting real people, and the first question that we will be answering speaks to that. But housing is critical at this moment in time, because when we house people, we respect people. And it's time to build no barrier housing. It's time to build it now. We will also be doing a 3-year market correction program for rental, flooding the market with the desperate rentals that we need. As a renter, I know. My kids, 21 and 20 years old, cannot find a place to live in the city in which they were born. But we will make sure that by the best way to predict whether or not rents go up or down, the best way to deliver rental affordability is by it even being available. And we have an effective zero availability rate, and that's not our right. Lastly, we will create a new office within the city of Vancouver that will be a nonprofit office that will expedite all social enterprise, expedite all nonprofit housing once and for all. No more waiting in the same lineup as for-profit development. You're going to get fast-tracked, you're going to get approved, and you're going to have people ready to get the job done. So please, work with me, say yes, and let's fix our city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Rebecca Bly. I'm running for council with the NPA, and happy to be here. Thank you for coming out. As Hector said, it's really important that people get involved. and get educated and understand the issues. Myself, I'm choosing to run because I have raised a young family in Vancouver. I was 20, was pregnant and a single mom, and my daughter is now 18. I've spent quite a number of years moving. I rent an East Van. I've sort of lived in that middle vortex of not quite being able to buy and still being able to have employment and sort of get my work done and raise my family. And I believe there's an opportunity to support that middle and make that middle bigger so that there's more services and more and a priority to those people living in Vancouver that can have a stable job, that can have a stable home, that has the right services to help them. And so that's why I'm running, and I'm proud to be one of the many female candidates. I think that we just can highlight right now that there is a movement towards creating opportunity and equity, and I'm happy to be part of this election, to be part of that change.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brandon Yan, and I'm running with One City for Vancouver City Council alongside Christine Boyle. And why I'm running right now is because as a young person, as a queer person, as a person of color, and as someone who has experience advocating for policy change and actually achieving that policy change with senior government for young people in our school systems across BC, I think it's time now that we step up in this momentous opportunity that we have to take hold of our city and to ensure that the city works for everyone and not just a few. So I'm running with One City because I believe our values, the values around social justice and anti-oppression that have informed our platform, that inform things like a focus on reconciliation, not just acknowledging land, but actually returning the land to their owners. So we need to talk about actually following through on those commitments, talking about climate action, talking about affordability, and our entire plan is focused on non-market housing because the market has failed. And so for us, our whole thing is around how do we ensure that everyone is included in our city, and not just the folks who the market works for, because those who have the means will succeed and those without won't. And so we need to make sure that everyone has a place in Vancouver, and I want to thank you all for having us today.
Hi, everybody. It's funny because my older brother, Alan Williams, he actually said, you look different when you're dressed for work. So this is me. This is the guy that you see walking around here because I'm actually your neighbor. I live in Strathcona. I'm right by McLean Park. I know we're outside the worst part of the downtown east side, but I've been working here for the last 5 years with the PAC, the last 3 years as the chair, because we have a huge gap in our social economic statuses. We have a huge gap in our cultures, and we've got a lot of healing that needs to be done. You know, when I stepped up to do this, it was because I saw that our community is fractured, and it is stronger when it's together. And I chose to live here. You know, I'll be honest, I grew up on the poor side of Point Grey. I know people laugh at that, but 40 years ago, there was a poor side. We were very working class. But we got priced out. My wife and I got 3 kids, 2 of them got permanent disabilities. We're in a community that accepts us. They're okay with if I dress like this, or I have my baseball cap on, I got my tank top and my shorts. But the reality is, we still need help. We need people that understand what's happening here. Not just visiting to see what's going on out there and going, oh my gosh, look how bad it is. But people who actually live here, work with people here, understand the problems. And that's what I'm here to do. So my name is David Chen. I'm with ProVancouver, and I'm stepping up to become your mayor. I have a team of people who have no history with political parties or big business groups. We're here for you. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Hi, folks. Hello. Hi, folks. My name is Pete Ryan. I'm running for City Council with the Green Party. I'm running. Michael Weave is here as well, also with the Green Party. He's currently the Park Board Commissioner. It's good to see a lot of you. A lot of you know me from the neighborhood. I've lived here for the last 30 years. And I've worked with many of you on a lot of issues here in the neighborhood. I work with RICAM. Of course, I work on the Downtown East Side Local Area Plan and on Hogan's Alley Planning. And actually, you know, when I first ran for City Council, it was in 2014, and it was inspired by our collective experience working on the Downtown East Side Local Area Plan. You know, we put a lot of time and effort into that. It was 2 years of what amounted to window dressing, because after 3 days of public hearings, 3 full days of public hearings, we never got a definition of social housing that was going to define how we developed the Downtown East Side. And that was so frustrating, and it felt so used that I was like, you know what? Screw these guys. I'm going to run for city council. I didn't get elected then, but I'm hoping to get elected now. You know, I've lived in the neighborhood for a long time. I've lived in Strathcona. I've lived in Chinatown and up in Victory Square area. I've lived all over. I used to live in Silver Avalon at one point in my life. I realize that the Downtown East Side is an extremely complicated neighborhood, and outsiders don't often get it. I don't even get it. None of us get it. But what we commit to as Greens is that we want to really invest in neighborhood having a voice. So we plan our communities, and that's what really we're about. We're talking about neighborhood planning offices where we can get together and plan the future of our communities. There's some immediate issues that we can deal with in the Downtown East Side. Obviously, opioid poisoning, we need a coordinated strategy, not just in the city, but with the province and the feds. We need to come together and address this head on. We need to fix, on the city level, we need to fix the SRA bylaw. It's not appropriate anymore. It doesn't protect the actual cost of those single room accommodations. We need to fix the standards of maintenance bylaw, because it's appalling that we had situations like the Balmoral in the region go on for as long as they have. And we need to push the province to up our welfare rates.
Thank you. Sean.
Hi, my name is Shauna Sylvester, and I'm running as an independent candidate for mayor. And I want to thank you for inviting us into Carnegie and into this community, because it is a community. I first started working, I worked at Woodward's when it was Woodward's, and I was 17 years old, and I worked at the Dominion building for 12 years, and my former husband was the head of TradeWorks. My brother-in-law helped to start the Carnegie Literacy Center. So it feels like a community I've been around. I'm going to be really honest. I don't know this community well. I feel like I do. I create characteristics, but I don't, because it needs constant engagement and listening and understanding. What I have learned, and I've taken a lot of time since I decided to run, is to hear what our real needs in this community. One of the things that I've heard from so many women is that women aren't included, are differentially affected, aren't included in the homelessness numbers. I've made a commitment to 2,800 new at welfare rates or disability rates units in this area, 1,000 going to women. So that's a first step. Thanks to some folks that have been working on drug policy for years and years and years. I have been also learning about drug policy for years, but really wanting to see the 4 pillars back. So we're looking at treatment, we're looking at prevention in addition to the harm reduction, and maybe less of the focus being on enforcement as on the issues of treatment and trauma. So that's another issue. The opioid poisoning issue is very critical. But I also want to see support to the frontline people, yes, to the first responders, but to all of the people that are working and serving this community every day.
What about volunteers? I've been volunteering for 17
Absolutely.
years.
Thank you. Yes, the volunteers,
And where's
the
the
peer
help?
support.
Where's the help for me?
Absolutely. Where is the help? So let's
There's no
talk
help
about how we
for
can
me.
create that. And thank you for raising that.
There's no
I think
help
that's
for
a
me.
really important point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean. Jean?
Hi, everybody, I'm Jean Swanson, and I'm running for council with COPE. I know a lot of you, and that's because I've been hanging around here for the last 12 years at Carnegie, working for more and better housing, higher welfare rates, and trying to stop gentrification. But basically banging my head against the brick wall of City Hall and now thinking, okay, maybe if we have somebody up there, we can actually get what we want. So that's why I'm running. So I'm running with COPE. COPE has a great platform and we have great candidates. One of them, Ann Roberts, is here. Raise your hand, Ann. So this is what we want. Priorities are saving lives, right? We have to stop the opioid crisis, which means, we can talk about it later, but it mostly means we need to have clean and safe and free drugs and treatment on demand. We desperately need housing for everybody. We have a plan to get the money to build the housing, which is a mansion tax. We'll tax mansions over $5 million. We'll we could get enough money to end homelessness in 1 year. We're for a rent freeze, so no more rents going up. Slumlords have to fix up their buildings using section 23.8 of the Standards of Maintenance bylaw. Get rid of the bylaws that criminalize jaywalking and vending. An Aboriginal Healing and Wellness Center. Stop police harassment of homeless people in 10 cities. Make transit cheap or free. And free breakfast and lunch for kids in school. So we're setting the agenda in this campaign, COPE is. We're the ones that are talking about a rent freeze. We're the ones that first talked about actually ending homelessness. We're the ones that first talked about a mansion tax. And I think it'd be great if we could get all of the COPE candidates, Ann Roberts, Derek O'Keefe, Jean Swanson, and we have a great Aboriginal school board candidate, Diana Day, Barb Parrott, Gwen Giesbrecht on Park Board, and John Irwin on school board, or on Park Board too. Yeah, so thanks, and we'll talk some more later.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for having us here today. It's a great pleasure to talk with you. First of all, I'm Kennedy Stewart. I'm running as an independent for mayor of Vancouver, but I gotta say, I would love to have Jean Swanson and Pete Fry and Brandon Yan with me on council because I think they have great ideas and I think we work very well together. So let's hear it from them. I think they're fantastic council candidates. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself because I know we'll be talking about policy as we go along through today. I'll let you know that I grew up in rural Nova Scotia. And kind of an idyllic, you can imagine, you can picture when that is. And it was going pretty well for me until about the late 1970s, where my family went bankrupt. And that was a horrible experience. We lost our home, we lost everything. I remember the auction where they cleared my house out and they sold everything, and then I lived way back in rural Nova Scotia in absolute poverty for about 5 years. And that was the formative period of my life. I thought, from then on, I got to fight for people that are stuck in this because it's very, very difficult. So I became a musician and earned enough money to go to university in Nova Scotia. And then as soon as I was finished, the unemployment rate was so high that I came right to Vancouver. My grandmother gave me $100 and I had a one-way ticket. And I came here, and I'd never really lived in a city, and it was a bit overwhelming to begin with. But I soon fell in love with Vancouver because this city has given me absolute everything. Everything that I've got in my life is from this city. So I'm running because I love it here and I want to give back. But I do understand that when I grew up in rural Nova Scotia, everybody was a neighbor. That's how we looked at absolutely everyone. There was no judgment. You know, somebody needs to borrow something, you don't even ask, you give it to them, you leave your doors open. And that's how I look at people, as neighbors. So everything I've tried to do, including being a member of parliament, I was elected with Jack Layton in 2011, followed his guidance in terms of how do we treat people and what do we fight for, and we fight for equality. That's what I'm going to do as mayor, and thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you, Kennedy. Susan.
ICMCI Sayola. Oich Kowam Pierce known as Lechi Tomiatate. Fred Hardy Quiensna. Vancouver Okmail. That's in the language of the Squamish nation.
Coast Salish people. I worked
15 years.
My name is Fred Hardy.
Vancouver is
My home. And I want to thank you for giving me a few moments to come down here and say a few words. That's what I was just saying there. I worked on the downtown east side for a couple of years, but I worked here at a time that you'll all remember I was on the Missing Women's Task Force. In my declaration to run for mayor, I made a solemn oath to remember and work for the missing women, the missing and murdered. That was very, very important. The work that I did on the downtown east side, for those of you who live and work here, it scars you for life when you see some of the things that you see. Some of the people that I met, and their stories, they wound you and they never leave you. I lived a very privileged life, but I didn't always. Maybe, and I listen to what Kennedy says, maybe I'm the only person on this table. When I was 17, I sold my clothes, I sold my guitar,
I sold a clock radio so that I could eat. I know what it means to be poor. I was raised poor. I understand the issues. I was one of 10 children and a single parent living in a small house. I have got your back, and I will be an advocate for the downtown east side. My team will be advocates for the downtown east side. We will fight every inch of the way for you.
Thank you, Fred. So we're now going to move into questions, and I'm glad to see Lene's back, and now she can ask the question.
Hi everyone, thank you all for being here. We're grateful to have you. My name is Lene and I'm the coordinator at the Carnegie Community Action Project. So on behalf of CCAP, I'd like to ask you all the first question. So residents in the downtown east side are subjected to increased surveillance and police violence each and every day. Poor, racialized, and trans community members are victims of police brutality, causing people to fear the police. If you are elected, what will you do to end police violence, hold the Vancouver Police Department accountable, and build peer-led community safety?
Go ahead. Anybody wants to take that on?
Well, do you want to start here? Then?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, good.
Why don't we start? We'll start here, and we can rotate who starts first. How about that? We'll make this up as we go along. But I really appreciate the question. It is an important question, and of course, so long as we discriminate against those who are poor, so long as we discriminate against those with mental health issues, and we discriminate against those experiencing drug addiction, and we keep people on the streets, left to their own devices, left to be preyed upon, we will continue to have this divide. The problem with our culture, and the question around police violence stems from a bigger question of the us versus them. But I don't believe that there is us versus them. There is no them and you. Just us together. There's just us together. Well, you know that you're right to be angry. There's every reason to be angry. But we have a choice. Everybody wants change. But the question is, will we change? There's a lot of people that need to change. There's a lot of people that need to change in this city.
Hey.
But we need to make sure that we have a choice. We can solve our problems with hate and anger. Or we can act with compassion. Everybody loves their city, but love is in action. It's time to act that way. It's time the renter to love the owner and the owner to love the renter. The rich to love the poor to love the rich. You left. You want to reject. You want to stay in the fight. You're too committed to the fight. You're too committed. I have been homeless. I am the most real. What I'm telling you right now is that we have a choice. We have a choice. We have a choice to continue the old battles. We have a choice to continue on this path. But here's what we can do. We can continue a new conversation. I, as your mayor, chief of police, representatives of the downtown east side community, we will make sure that we develop a new holistic plan. Not the window dressing plan that was developed before, but a real plan for the downtown east side. We're going to give people the housing they need, the services they need, and we're going to do it together.
Thanks, Mr. Rebecca.
So we at the MPA are looking at 3 different approaches to police and the relationships with people that live in the downtown east side. One of them is, first and foremost, accountability, partnership, and continuing to decriminalize drug activity at all levels, so that people can see that we're for, that everybody's for. Yes, we're not us yet, and there's potential for us to build relationships with police, with the residents, with services, with everybody involved, so that we get there. What we're committed to, we fundamentally believe that all Vancouverites have a right to feel safe and sound in their communities, no matter what the income level, the housing situation, or the neighborhood. Everybody. So we will support the Vancouver Police Department in meeting any additional officers to de-stress. I get it. Okay, thank you. the system, the workload, including supporting people that are in need, the people that are on the street, the people that are confronted with this every single day. But if we're going to get to partnership, we have to truly believe that we want it. If we don't want it, we won't get there.
Thanks, Rebecca. We're going to go actually to Fred and then work our way back. Fred?
Is this microphone working? Hello, hello. 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello, hello. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Tough crowd. I'm the cop, right? I was a policeman for 33 years. So, but I'm also the policeman who, with the Squamish Nation, completely changed the relationship between the police and the marginalized community. I'm the policeman who stood against the entire police department to do not what was popular, but what was right. Now I can tell you, in terms of turning around a relationship for a marginalized community where the police really didn't know the Squamish Nation, and the Squamish Nation didn't know the police. Listen to this. Last year, the West Vancouver Police Department bought a canoe. The Squamish Nation are embedded in the actual strategic plan of the police department. There is a Squamish Nation person who sits on the police board. That's integration. That's about working with marginalized communities as a police officer. It went a lot further. I worked at doing cleanup. I cleaned the streets of the Squamish Nation. Not because anybody asked me to, because I knew it had to be done. And when my colleagues looked at me and thought I was crazy, and they said they're not coming down to pick up litter, this has got nothing to do with picking up litter, this is about building communities, is what I said. From there on in, the Squamish Nation and the West Vancouver Police Department, and I say this without a hint of hyperbole, have one of the strongest relationships of police and community anywhere. I started the sex abuse and domestic violence rally. 15 years, and it's led by the chief constable who walks at the front of a crowd of people. Anyone can join. Anyone. No one's vetted. You can come, you can walk, but it's about to solemnly honor the people who suffered sexual abuse and domestic violence. That's what I did as a police officer. This is how we get community and police working together, and how we stop harassment.
Thanks, Fred. Kennedy?
Well, it's a great question to start off this debate with. For me, as I said, thanks. Well, as I said at the beginning, my upbringing, I had one grandfather who was an Anglican priest, and the other grandfather who was a gunsmith. So I had both sides of the spectrum, but what both of my grandfathers were committed to was giving back to the community, is to make sure that they treat everybody like a neighbor, but the minute you move from that starting point, that's when things start to go sideways in the community, and I think that's what we've lost here. That we've forgotten that we're neighbors and we all have to stick up for each other. So what we have to do, what I've announced, I mean, that's my story, but what I have announced a couple of weeks ago with Libby Davies and with Karen Ward, who's here, Dean Wilson, is an emergency task force for the downtown east side, and that task force is they have to deliver immediate actions, which is to reduce the deaths here. I mean, it's just atrocious what's happening. The poison drug supply is, and we have to act on that right away in the very short period of time, and that's going to involve all community members to make sure that we're delivering it right. So I've already been talking through the summer with people about that, but we get right to work with the task force. But there's much more than that, and I think we need a new plan for the downtown east side, and that's why we have to renegotiate the Vancouver agreement.
Questions about the police.
That's right, but that's included in all of this. The question is about the police, but if we just go willy-nilly without talking to each other without a plan, then we're just going to keep getting what we're getting. So that's what the Vancouver agreement will do, will be to reassess about how we work in the downtown east side, and And that's my proposal. So a Downtown East Side Emergency Task Force, which would be tasked with coming up with a new strategy to make sure that we all treat each other as neighbors and we don't take anybody for granted, but most of all is to stop the deaths here in the Downtown East Side. Thank you.
Could you help me, Vince? Could you help me? Yeah, so. I just wanted to mention a few things about trying to make sure that the Downtown East Side is kept safe from police. First is housing is a form of harm reduction. We need housing for everybody. Second, we need civilian oversight of the police. Yes. We need to make it safe for people who have been profiled to complain. Yes. We need to reduce the police budget and put some of the money into housing and services for people who need services. We need to stop the bylaws that criminalize people, like the bylaws that say you can't vend on the street, and the bylaws, the jaywalking bylaws. We need regular meetings between police and Downtown East Side residents without guns, where people feel safe to talk about what's really happening. We need to decriminalize drugs so that it's legal, so that it's safe, so that people aren't dying from poison drugs. And we need to get rid of or re-educate the officers that are harassing Downtown East Side residents. Thanks, Maddie.
You follow Jean. So one of the things I've learned over years, that if you've got a mental health issue, if you've got issues related to poverty, the system is not set up to protect you or to support you.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. It in fact kicks you when you're down. And I know, because I've got enough mental health in my family to know what people who end up not having support systems go through and how they are harassed. And so this issue, there's also an issue here of systemic racism that's going on. So the role of a leader, particularly a mayor, is to work with all of the city councilors to take a really good hard look at how we are perpetuating those systems of racism, those systems of misogyny, those systems of economic separation. Thank you. It is a war on the poor, and it is the war on the disenfranchised, the war on the unmarginalized. And so how do we deal with that? We name it. We start to frame the problem and we go at it. Jean has identified a whole series of solutions. I think that there are many solutions that come when you start talking with groups of people that know the reality of what it is on the receiving end of that systemic marginalization. And that's the starting point, but we don't need a lot more studies about this community. God knows there's been a lot of studies of this community. How loud have you been in terms of the solutions that are before us? And that's the starting point. Housing is a starting point, so is treatment, so is dealing with trauma, but there's also the issue of police brutality. And that's an issue of sitting down and understanding deeply what's going on. WISH does not have another liaison for policing. Once the woman that is currently there resigns, there's nobody there in place. So how do we deal with that? Thank you.
So, that got really loud really fast. So, some of you have known me for a while, and you know that I wasn't always like a suit-wearing guy. And, you know, when I was younger and skinnier and poorer, I used to get hassled by the police down here all the time. And now, cops see me on the street and they're like, oh, hey, Pete, how's it going? So I know it's like a privilege, right, that I'm now experiencing. But I get that had I been a couple of shades darker or in a different context, I wouldn't be experiencing that privilege. So I think when we talk about police interaction, especially in the downtown east side, we really need to invest in some deep kind of cultural sensitivity training so that we have a better understanding. And I think that involves working with the community and actually getting to the root of some of the issues. And, you know, I think it is possible. I mean, I've met, and I'm sure a lot of you have met, there are good cops down here. There are some people who really do care. And we need to nurture that good behavior and really work on it together. And I will say that that sensitivity training has to start with decriminalizing drugs and really taking an approach that does not scare people away from harm reduction and really investing in harm reduction as part of policing. And I do think that, to Jean's point, I think better civilian oversight on the police board is a must. But there's a second part to that original question that I kind of heard though too, and that's about surveillance. And I think at the root of that is when we talk about modifying our single resident accommodation bylaws, it needs to be, you know, fixing those rates or those rents to shelter rates and something that's affordable so that we don't get these kind of hipster hotel conversions that we see with a lot of the SROs. But we also need to look at how we treat residents, because as a lot of you will know, SRO residents don't have the same rights as a regular homeowner or a renter. And we see all the kind of surveillance that goes on and the restrictions on who you can bring to your room and when you can go into your room and in and out. That's totally inappropriate. That's not a way for homes to be operated. So we need to look at that as well, and that's part of that sort of surveillance equation that you mentioned.
It's an interesting question to deal with the police. I've learned a lot here. RJ's spouse, Gary, actually came out to a workshop for our non-Aboriginal families about what's happening with Aboriginal families. And I had no idea that the Indian Act actually makes it so that every incarcerated First Nations person triggers more transfer money from the feds to the province. There is no incentive right now in the system, the way it's built, to change. You know, it's funny, in Strathcona, I can call the cops. They'll show up in 30 seconds. We have other people who are single moms. They're marginalized. They'll call, and no one will show up. There's profiling going on. And it was terrifying to this mom that came to me because I was in the pack, and she says, you know, my neighbor downstairs pepper sprayed me. I'm scared. And the cops won't show up. So I said, next time that happens, call me. I'll show up, I'll call the cops, and we'll see what happens. It's funny because, you know, I don't dress like this all the time. So in Strathcona, when I'm wearing my baseball cap, my Mac jacket, I actually had my kid strapped to my back. I was walking out to Chinatown to buy some food. And there was an assault, and it was called in. Cops came, and they yelled at me, "You the guy that beat someone up?" I got my kid strapped on my back. I'm like, what are you thinking? But it's because I was dressed with this cap and a Mac jacket, and I looked like I was a rabble-rouser. That needs to end. I'm sorry, but this culture of discrimination needs to end. The police report to the mayor. The mayor has a duty to change the thinking, and if it takes getting rid of people, I have no problem with that. In Strathcona, I know some people say, I don't work well with people. It's not true. There's two sides to every story. I don't work well with people that are discriminatory, that create a problem in unity within the community. So I have no problem ending this. Thank you.
So questions around the police, I think, fundamentally revolve around this idea around justice. And so justice is around the idea of balance, right? And so when I think about justice, I don't think it's just for the police to confiscate an opioid replacement program. I don't think it's just the police actively target folks of color or trans individuals or Indigenous folks when they're carding. And I think those practices need to end and they need to stop right now. And I don't think it's fair also when it comes to the city itself around bylaw enforcement. We've written about this in White City around people being ticketed for living in their cars. How is this justice? How is this serving the city? How is this serving folks who are living in their cars, still have jobs, but have nowhere to live, and they're saying, you know what, you're not our version of homeless, so here's a ticket. Because someone else wants a parking spot. And that has to end. The city can't keep going on like this. And so when it comes to this, I think I agree with a lot of folks on this panel around oversight for the police, around how do we actually change the board, the systemic view of the police as well. We also are advocating for true sanctuary cities, so ending any collaboration between the police department and Canadian Border Services. And also taking that further into our schools as well, a sanctuary schools policy that we're working on currently as well. And so those are some of the policy pieces on our website that we're working on, and I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass the mic.
Thank you all. Now, the next section is on one-word answer.
Yes.
Okay, and
Everything can be solved.
here's the first question. We live in a time of austerity, where funding towards social programs in the downtown east side that people use and need are cut while the budget for the police increases. Will you work towards reallocating the Vancouver Police Department budget towards building low-income social housing programs we need? I assume you all agree. Next question. The downtown east side community has been fighting for an Aboriginal healing and wellness center since the downtown east side local area plan committee called in the city and Vancouver Coastal Health to build it in 2014. If elected, will you expedite this project? So can I get you actually to answer the question as a
That second question?
The downtown east side community has been fighting for an Aboriginal healing and wellness center since the downtown east side local area plan. And it called this, since the local area plan committee called on the city and Vancouver Coastal Health to build it. This is in 2014. If elected, would you expedite this project? So can I just...
Yes, we will build the healing center, absolutely. Yes.
How about the police budget? Sorry, respect to the police budget.
We'll finish this round and then we'll come back to your...
Partnership.
Yes.
Yes to both of those questions.
Yes.
Yes. Yes to both.
Yes.
Yes.
Will I allocate the police budget to affordable housing?
Let me rephrase the question. We live in a time of austerity where funding towards social programs in the downtown east side that people use and need are cut, while the budget for police increases. Will you work towards reallocating the Vancouver Police Department budget towards building low-income social housing programs that we need here?
No.
Yes.
Yes. I'll build low-income social housing.
Complicated.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
If that's my choice, no.
Okay. Third, bylaw section 23.8 states that when a building does not comply with standards, City Council should order the landlord to remedy concerns. And if landlord fails to do so within 60 days of the order, the city will carry out the work at the owner's expense. If the city enforced section 2.3.8, we wouldn't have lost the Balmoral and the Regent Hotel. And the question to you is, if you are elected, will you enforce section 23.8 immediately?
Yes.
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 Renovate, expropriate.
Yes.
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 And if elected, will you support Ho-Gonzalez Society proposal to build 100% rental housing on the Ho-Gonzalez block?
Undecided.
I don't know.
Yes.
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 Lama, is it 100% social housing? Yes.
With community facilities and store, right? And social housing, yes.
Yes.
Consultation.
To end homelessness, we need at least 10 sites of welfare pension rate social housing with about 100 to 150 units on each side. There are at least 6 sites in the downtown east side that the city already owns and will be suitable for social housing. If elected, will you commit to building 100% welfare pension rate housing at those city-owned sites and work towards purchasing new sites in the downtown east side to meet the urgent need for housing?
Yes.
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 I want to say yes.
Citywide.
Yes.
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 If elected, would you decriminalize 10 cities as they provide a temporary solution for a serious housing crisis?
Build housing.
That's not an answer, man. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Pivot legal, they're already legal, so yes.
Yes, and I would really love an opportunity to talk more about this, but yes, but I have so much more to say about that.
Yes, and provide facilities like porta potties and washing stations and food.
Yes.
Already have a plan? Yes.
Thank you all. The next question is going to come from Our Homes Can't Wait.
Hey, so do you guys know about 58 West Hastings?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. Okay. All right. So just to give a little background for people that don't know, in 2016, Mayor Gregor Robertson signed a contract in this room to build 100% welfare and pension rate housing, community-controlled housing at 58 West Hastings. That was Hello? Okay. And this has been a fight that we've been fighting for 10 years now. And the city just released a development application for 1/3 of that. That's 70 units of the 230 promised at welfare and pension rates. The rest will be market rate rentals. And we just want to know, here, Flora.
We want to know if what we've been fighting for the past, 10 years basically, for that site at 100% welfare pension rates. With a guarantee what the mayor said when he promised that it would be, and now it's being cut to like just 1/3, which is like, it's not even like a dent to half the people that live downtown, and then who's gonna profit from, like, who's gonna be able to get that? Like, how are you gonna set up the people as to who's gonna be living in there? Like, everybody is at the same level of where they need that housing, they need a place to live. Like for them to have some kind of dignity for themselves too, it's just like they need a home. They need a roof over their head, someplace that they know they can lay their head down without worrying about whether they're gonna get their stuff stolen or somebody's gonna come there and harass them and stuff. Like, you know, it's just unnecessary bullshit, that is.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just kind of like going fly with it. But yeah, and I've seen this, like, you know, I've been downtown, I've been where I wasn't able to make it to a shelter, and I would go sleep at Oppenheimer. I had no tent, no blankets, and I just slept out there. I had my clothes that I used to cover myself up, and that's like, you know, was not even safe for me to even be out there, like with everybody, like, you know, you don't know who's out there. So it's just like, we need that 58 West Hastings as 100%, nothing else. At least that would be a start for some of the people down here to start, like, you know, building themselves, their self-esteem to, like, you know, I've met a lot of people that are well educated down here, but no fault of their own, why they became addicted and then homelessness has just gone crazy. So,
Thanks, Flora. So, politicians reneging on their promises is nothing new. There's nothing I've ever promised that I've reneged on. My work with the Squamish Nation is testament to everything that I've ever promised and I've carried through, despite the harm it did to my career. I pushed through. Yes, there'll be 100% commitment to whatever Gregor Robertson did for the, is it 100 units?
no, it's 230.
200, okay, 230 units. We're going further. Your t-shirt there, rent freeze now, I completely disagree. Rent lower now. Rent lower now, not rent freeze. They've got to go down.
Decrease rent.
Sorry?
Decrease rent.
Decrease rent, okay. Okay, so we're going to 400, 900, and 1,300. That is affordable. 400, 900, 1,300. That is affordable. Rent freeze now? No. Rent decrease now. Thank you, Roller Girl. Rent decrease now. That's what we're after.
Yes, so 100% social housing at the affordable rate that you were saying at 58 West Hastings is reasonable. It was promised that it should be delivered, and that's what I would do as mayor. However, I have a much larger plan for this city that I've been working on. You know, as an expert, a housing policy expert, I've been working on housing policy all around the world. I have committed to delivering 25,000 affordable housing units across the city over the next 10 years. And that would be for households making $80,000 or under. There would be, but much of that would include social housing as well, whether it's in co-ops or delivered by nonprofits. It would be built on city land. There's already 20 lots around the city that have been identified that can be immediately built on. That's already in the plan. So 25,000 units over 10 years. That's the pledge. 58 West Hastings for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm part of the Our Homes Can't Wait coalition, and I totally support the Our Homes Can't Wait demand for 100% welfare, pension rate, social housing at 58 West Hastings, and so does all of COPE, including Ann Roberts and Derek O'Keefe. And yesterday, COPE put out a news release that says, if we are elected at the first council meeting on November 13, we'll put forward a motion that the staff report back with at least 3 options for sources of revenue for 58 West Hastings to meet the former mayor's commitments. And that the mayor consult with Our Homes Can't Wait to propose how the mayor's commitment that housing be controlled by the community be implemented. So we're totally committed to that. It's in writing. We also have to end homelessness by getting revenue from the mansion tax. Over 200, about 200 million a year. That could end the homelessness in 1 year with After that first year, we would go on and build lots of social housing, starting with the lowest income, building up, so that renters who can't afford rents can afford nice social non-market housing. We're not really into condos. We want to get housing out of the market like it is in Vienna, where 60% of housing. And we want a rent freeze or a decrease if necessary. But if the province won't give us a rent freeze, we want to use city powers to do as much of that as we can. We're already talking with lawyers. We know how we can do some freezing with the tenant protection and relocation plans to prevent people from being evicted. If you want a rent freeze, if you want to end homelessness in a year, there's 7 people you can vote for that are guaranteed to work tooth and nail to do that, and that's all the 7 that have COPE after their name.
Thanks. And going back to the question that you were asking, if it wasn't for Jean after the Coke debate, I wouldn't have understood the issues. I want to thank Jean for really helping me understand that. The question I keep coming up, and this is where I want to have a conversation with those elected on City Council that are taking leadership on this, is are there any supports at all? So if you had seniors in that, would you have supports for them within that, or is it support free? So that's a question that comes later. But those are the kind of questions I would have around the kind of housing. Absolutely at the level of welfare and disability. That seems to be a no-brainer. And I've already made a commitment in my platform to 2,800 more units, and really to get at those that are invisible and homeless. Even though our homeless rate is only at 2,100, I think there's a lot of people who are invisible in that count. So that's why the numbers are higher. What I'm interested in doing as a mayor, and I put all my platforms out there, so you can see them. I did it almost 6 weeks ago, is to support the council members in the work that they come to council to do. You need a mayor that is there and can work across the political spectrum, that is going to respect each of the council members that are elected to do the work that they were elected to do by the constituents they were elected to do. And that's the role that I want to play as a mayor, is to support those folks in getting the job done and to use the office of the mayor to be as consultative with our community and to demonstrate real leadership of bringing people to get to work, not just to talk. Thank you.
So I remember when the mayor signed that contract. I remember when the mayor signed that contract and he was right out here on the Carnegie steps and with that giant Post-it note written out in Jiffy Mark, and I thought, what's he doing? Like, the commitment that he made there, the promise, I knew it was an empty promise, but he made it. It was just like ending homelessness. It was another empty promise. So I'm not going to make an empty promise to you guys. I don't believe in that kind of thing. I don't know what the real promise. What? I'll make a real promise. I don't make empty promises. So here's what I don't know about 58 West Hastings is the ownership and the structure, and I can't commit to however that will work. That was the mayor's business. What we do commit to, as the entire run of us that are running, we commit to, number one, fundamentally defining housing as a human right on the Vancouver Charter, and making sure we're taking affordability to actual relevant local incomes, not picking affordability in market. So we want to see us building city-owned housing throughout the city. I can't commit to just 58 West Hastings. I don't know what's going on with 58. But we do commit to building. Well, I don't think anybody actually knows what's going on with 58.
Yes, we do.
Well, the real estate stuff happens in camera, so it's not actually public. Hector might know because he's all
Public hearing.
Okay, so I personally don't know what's happening with the mapping. I know Chinatown Foundation, BC Housing, BCH, they're all partners in this. Who's paying the bills? I don't know. I'm not going to make some empty promise and say, yeah, sure. But I do commit to building more city-owned housing at affordable rates for people on old age security and
Sounds like a no.
I don't know.
So I remember when that contract was signed too, and I remember when Jean went at a public hearing and brought that back to Mayor Robinson and said, you broke this promise. The funny thing is, it's not a promise. When he signed that, it became a legal contract. And I've talked to lawyers, and when that legal contract is done, even future councils are beholden to that contract. So it's not a promise. This is, you have to come through with this because the mayor, with the acting powers of the city, signed that document. So, as a future council, I will follow through with that contract. Another thing that I've heard is I keep hearing 400, 900, 1,300. I've heard this before. 105 Kiefer. You know what the developers do? they shrink the units. Rental 100, we have a big problem because it's jigs, so it's not affordable. And the component of the social housing is shrinking all the time. People in our community are saying, there's 6% of us in there. We feel this big compared to the rest of the market rent people or the market house people. They don't feel comfortable. We need that 100% social housing. We need the numbers to come up so people don't have to feel they have this much self-esteem because they need help from the system. So I am committed to that. I get it. We need those numbers higher. We have already committed in our own platform to 50% new rentals out of all the builds, and we're going to increase the amount of social housing. Maybe we're not aggressive enough. I'm going to have to look at those numbers because, like I said, I get this 100%. We got to make those numbers work, and 58 Hastings has to happen. It's a legal contract. Thank you.
With regards to 58 West, there's a lot I don't know like Pete, but I am committed to working with folks like Kennedy, who's also endorsed One City's plan around nonprofit housing. And so how do we get there? Like Dean, we also want to see a progressive property tax increase on homes over a certain amount. Ours is $4 million, and a 2% increase on homes over $8 million. And so in our first year, we also are hoping to build just over 2,000 temporary modular homes, because while we can talk about 58 West Hastings, which is important and we need to get that done, how long is it going to take to actually get that building done? We know we can build temporary modular homes in 6 months. And we just need the money and we need the will. And we have the land, and so let's get that done too. And we also need to ensure that the rents that we create in a lot of our non-market housing are also affordable for local income. So making sure that they don't exceed that 30% threshold. I'm a renter. I rent in Kitsilano with a dog, and it's extremely difficult to find a place that's also pet friendly. So we can also talk about that too. The other thing too, in addition to 58 West Hastings, it's also important, as I mentioned earlier in my opening statement, about how we actually follow through on reconciliation and ensuring that land actually gets turned over to the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh so they can build housing for their nations and also for other urban and indigenous peoples and be truly in community and in reconciliation with these communities. So that's what I have to say about that.
We're looking at housing as a holistic approach. There are things to do in other neighborhoods that aren't going to directly impact the downtown east side, but I want to highlight them so that we can understand that anything we can do to create downward pressure, not simply just by increasing supply, but strategically increasing supply in all the different areas of need, to create that downward pressure to then make sure that market and below market housing and supply start to meet in the middle. So we're talking about that again. So one of the things that we're committed to doing is, we've talked about secondary suites. I get it, doesn't impact here, but it does create downward pressure. Building secure, attainable, purpose-built rental accommodation on city-owned land, we're committing to doing that. Fast-tracking housing in terms of the permitting to ensure that
we're talking about 58, like that's what we're at. Like,
you're absolutely right.
We've been at it for like 10 years. It's like, come on, like we almost had it there last year. Well, in fact, we had it when the mayor signed.
You're right, and so there's been a lot of different inputs from everybody on the panel so far, and it seems like there's many different approaches. Not having direct experience with that particular project, I can't comment directly on it. And I can hear that there's lots of different varying opinions, including what we can actually know to be true based on in-camera camera meetings or what was public. So I don't have that answer right now. I'll share with you just a little bit about what we're going to do about housing. One thing that I see is that we are missing transitional housing. So yes, we need to increase our social housing. Yes, we need to increase affordable housing, but I see that social housing is housing where there are elements of care and services provided, and affordable housing is for people who are stable. But there is a whole missing middle of people that are in transition, and we need to embed those services as well as helping people get back on their feet so that they're able to live the life that they want, not the life on our terms or your terms, but the one that they actually want to be living.
So this was one of the most incredible things that I sat through at Vancouver City Council over the last year was the profound community reaction, seeing many of your faces there, outraged that you had an agreement and a commitment by the Mayor of Vancouver, who played politics with this issue at this moment, at this time. And it was cruel. And many of you pointed your fingers out there and you called him out on it, and he stood there and he sat there and he took it, and it was a tough conversation. Ultimately, council approved that building. But what I brought forward was a motion for a replacement site. And that's what we got a commitment to. So we were not able to get it done at 58 West Hastings this time. That was a failure, they played a game, but I committed to a replacement site. And we will do that. But we will do so much more. Because I don't want you to feel that just one building is going to solve all of our problems. It's not. We need a holistic solution. And that's why we've committed to a real plan. And I encourage you, please, get our plan. Page 26, it starts. Bullet points is what everybody else is offering, but this is a real evidence-based plan. 15,000 new units of social housing owned by the city in perpetuity on city-owned land. 50 to 75,000 new rentals approved in the hopper, ready to go over the next 3 years. We're a new rate of change policy that is going to make sure that the renovictions that happened in Burnaby don't happen here. But remember, our low-income rentals have a giant bullseye on them because 26% of our land for the last 91 years has been the only place where we've been allowed to build rentals. I am going to fix that. We're going to have a new community plan for the downtown east side as a part of a real city plan. One that's built for the 21st century. One that's built for you and me. And we are going to fix our city together.
Thanks, Hector. The next question is going to be on Ho Gonzalez Society. And Robin is going to read it.
Hi there. My name is Robin Rottmeter. I'm speaking on behalf of Ho Gonzalez today. If elected, how do you propose to promote racial equity in the city to protect vulnerable people of color and their search for housing, employment, and safety from abuse by the law enforcement authorities?
Okay, how do you protect people from it? You have to have accountability. There's already legislation in place so that people are not marginalized on race. Okay? And we have to make sure it's enforced. A couple of things. Police departments, Jean talked about civilian oversight. I'm actually surprised that there is no civilian oversight. Right? It's shocking to me. In London, in the early 1990s, there was civilian oversight of policing. Very common. It did nothing to harm the police. The police welcomed it. And when there were people in custody, it was called the layperson's program. It could be anybody in this room actually walks into the police station and you identify yourself and you go and visit prisoners. And you make sure that they're okay and that what their conditions are and that they're getting everything that they deserve to be getting. I can't believe that we don't have it here. So, you know, there's a lot of vocal people in this room, but there are programs around the world which I think would really benefit the police department, and it would benefit the community. It will help the police department. You're going to find this very strange, and I'm just going to go back to my work with the Squamish Nation, but I actually advocated that Pivot came to the police department to look at the work we were doing with the Squamish Nation. There's no point in the police department being the judges of their own work. There's no point in me setting up a program and asking my colleagues how well I'm doing. If I go to Pivot, they've got no interest in making sure that I as a police officer look good. That's the benchmark. This is what you pay consulting companies come in and do. That's how I would do it. I would bring in a layperson program. I would absolutely have civilian oversight. I don't see anything wrong with civilian oversight.
Well, I'm very proud to have supported Jagmeet Singh for the leader of the NDP. I was the second MP to back Jagmeet because things have to change. In Parliament, there is really no discussion. It's all guys that look like me. That's what Parliament is. And why Jagmeet, I thought Jagmeet was so important for him to come to Parliament and be the first national leader of color, is because we need a different conversation in this country. And so Jagmeet, while he was an Ontario MPP, he fought against Carter because it had happened to him so many times. And so I followed, that was something that attracted me to follow, to support him as a candidate, because that experience is not right. And we know, so I've spoken out against this very early on in this campaign and saying the discriminatory stop and search can't go on. And in fact, the pressure from this community has been very, very important. The police have recently admitted that they are disproportionately stopping and searching people from different ancestries, and that has to stop. And I would say that actually London does show a way forward for this. And the police have said, and this is very important, is they are going to start to assess this in a real way, and that way we can get the grips to making sure that we have the policy that stops it. So I have taken action on this in the past, and I would do so as mayor, especially as the head of the police board. Thank you.
So thanks for the question. I think when we're thinking about civilian oversight, I'm just thinking here, wouldn't it be great if there was a committee for civilian oversight that was made up completely of racialized people? I think that's something that we could do. COPE is also really supporting Sanctuary City and wanting to make sure that cops don't report people to border security. We're also big on reconciliation with substance, like using some of the mansion tax money to actually give back land or land trusts to the host nations, the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish. Our school board candidate, Diana Day, is huge on closing the racialized achievement gap, so everybody has a chance to graduate with all the prerequisites they need to go on to other education if they want it, and also for an Indigenous high school. The city used to have a committee that they used to promote diversity, but I think we could kind of redo that committee and make it so it was actually a committee to stop racism and to fight racism and make sure that it was made up completely of racialized people and that its recommendations got implemented. So yeah, those are some of the ideas that we have, and that's Ann Roberts, Derek O'Keefe, for council with me, Jean Swanson, and for school board, Diana Day and Barb Parrott, and for park board, Gwen Giesbrecht and John Irwin. And another aspect of it is that racialized people are also low-income people, and we have a lot of policies that are designed to make the city affordable, not just a rent freeze, not just building social housing, but working towards free transit, starting with kids, working up to low-income people, and we're going to have an exciting announcement about that on Tuesday. So keep your ears open for that. And free breakfast and lunch in all the schools, so we can actually make sure that everybody who lives here, regardless of their income, regardless of their race or gender or religion, can actually participate in all the good things that the city has.
Robin, thank you, and thank you for asking the questions around Hogan's Alley, because I think for the vast majority of people in Vancouver, they don't even know the history of Hogan's Alley and don't know the history of the Black community in our city and how critical they've been to different periods in our history. So the one thing that to me is critical in this, I mean, I talked at the beginning of dealing with systemic racism, and I really mean that. And I think the idea of having, it's a racialized lens, but also an intersectional lens. Let's ensure that we look at the issues in our policies through those lenses, and let's go and look at all of those policies and how we are creating barriers. This year, I had a chance to work with women who had come to Canada out of conflict, out of genocide, and the experiences that they had. And it was the first time anyone had ever asked them, and these are leaders, women that are now in Vancouver providing leadership on the front lines of organizations. It was the first time anybody had ever asked them their experiences. So how are we creating and supporting those kinds of initiatives? How are we creating and supporting and creating spaces where women and men can come together and start to look at how we reshape our public spaces, how we talk about the people that have been involved in our communities, whether they were Chinese Canadians, whether they were South Asian communities, people, or how do we go back and really look at the decolonization of our system? So yes, reconciliation, but yes to decolonization too. We still are operating under the Indian Act. We've got so much work to do here. And I think there's also another issue here around young people coming out of foster care and the kind of how much that is a racialized issue as well. We've got so many issues to deal with here that come from coming out with a perspective that looks at our system and saying, how are we creating the barriers and how can we instead open the windows to a better, healthier community?
So, what's with me in this microphone? So we really have touched on some of the policing aspects and stuff, and I think that at the root of it, as we've discussed, is a better, more integrated community approach to policing where we're actually actively participating and planning and we're doing that kind of cultural sensitivity training. But really, I want to talk about the Hogan's Alley thing because, you know, at the root of a lot of this is the sort of colonial practice of erasure. So, you know, we're both wearing orange shirts for residential school survivors. And to remember that, and that's this Sunday, but I'm wearing it today because it's important that we contextualize it always. But that was a system of colonial erasure. It was taking the Indian out of the child or whatever it was they said in those days. And it had horrible effects. And similarly, when it came time to build a freeway through East Vancouver, they targeted the Afro-Canadian bloc. They specifically targeted the black bloc and said, let's get rid of the Negroes because that's how they thought at that time. And so we have a fantastic opportunity to actually reconcile that injustice, which really denied the black community the ability to form a community, you know, to form cultural capacity and business capacity, just like Chinatown or any other kind of ethnic village. And we were denied that opportunity, and I've been so proud to work with the Hogan's Alley group as a visioner with them to come up with this approach. And I just want to caution to be aware that there are people who will divide us, and it's another classic, along with erasure, another classic colonial approach is to divide people along racial lines and pit minorities against one another. And we've seen the previous council attempt to do this over the Hogan's Alley Northeast Falls Creek plan, and I warn and caution we have to be united. This Hogan's Alley opportunity, the Northeast Falls Creek opportunity as it presents itself to reconcile Hogan's Alley, to work with Chinatown, to work with our First Nations partners, including the urban indigenous population, not just the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, but all peoples. And I'm out of time, but thank you.
So we've already talked about sort of the police thing, and I think we need to get rid of people that are part of the cultural and profiling and the discrimination. I guess, you know, as long as they stay there, it's going to keep happening. I want to focus more on the cultural aspect because you've asked several things about it. First thing that I know is talking with a bunch of societies is that there's strength in numbers, there's strength in knowledge. And one of the challenges we have in the city, there are no grants for societies. Without that UNESCO heritage status, it seems like nobody cares about cultural hubs. And we need to create those. We need to create those grants to make sure that those cultural hubs are there, that people feel safe, that they can get the knowledge they need to get the work, to get the services that are available to them. That will help strengthen Hogan's Alley. That will help strengthen the Latin community here. That will help strengthen even the East Indian community, which has been displaced several times, right? And we need to do that because a lot of them are not going to qualify for UNESCO protection. But we, as the governance, need to actually step in and make that a priority. So that's what I want to do. I want to create those cultural spaces. I want to create those cultural grants to make sure that those services are available. Thank you.
So talking about marginalization and folks of color and Hogan's Alley, there's a couple of points I want to touch upon. One is around representation and about the labor that folks of color, the Black community, the Indigenous community has done to educate others, and I think it's time for our allies to step up. I think it's time that folks really put money where their mouth is. And so it comes to creating spaces that Hogan's-Alley is asking for, creating that cultural center, looking at Chinatown as a way in which we can actually empower others to hold on to their culture and share their culture with others. And it also comes down to representation too, right? So thinking about, you can do this, is Google the TransLink Mayor's Council and ask yourself, does this look like me? Because I frequently. This region is not represented in our electoral democracy, the diversity that exists here. And it's important that come October 20th, it doesn't have to be me, but I implore you to look at the folks of color who are running and look at their platforms and look at what they have to say, and also allow them to let their lived experience also guide your decision as well, because it's important to have that experience on councils. And thinking also about the culture that we live in, that we see is being given permission. We see being permission given with Donald Trump. We see it being given permission with Doug Ford. Being given permission with the Conservative Party in Canada. And we need to stop giving permission. We need to make white supremacy afraid again, and it needs to happen now.
So a big part of our platform, for lack of a better word, is really about community consultation. So truth is, I'm new to politics. I'm learning a lot about issues, and I had the fortune of a young man named Yassine to reach out to me. He is the thought leader behind African Descent Society and African Descent Festival. Recently, there he is. He's got a lot to say about Hogan's-Alley. He knows a lot more about it than I do, a lot more. So what I appreciate is that he has reached out to me, and I had an opportunity to have coffee with him, and we're gonna go and we're gonna walk around. He's gonna show me the things that I don't know. So I don't have a lot else to say about that, except that how important it is that that happens. People who are, anyone who is displaced in our personal relationships, in our families, it happens all the time. Mental health, drug addiction, people are displaced all of the time. And the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that that's happened. The second thing we have to do is show up and be willing to get into conversation and not be divisive and not win, but just really show up and see what is it that we can do, what is it that the person really wants, how can we help facilitate that conversation and make a difference? Because that is Vancouver. I mean, it's not even just Vancouver, that's the world. Part of why Yassine got in touch is I had the fortune of working in Ethiopia and Mozambique in the last 4 years on education and in conservation, and it's about sustainable leadership. It's about getting rid of this learned helplessness, getting rid of the idea that people have to depend in that part of the world on NGOs, and that they can actually self-start and they can motivate and activate, but they just need a kickstart. Just like I did when I was 20 and pregnant, just like lots of people do. And so that's what I have to say about that.
Well, thank you to all the Hogan's-Alley advocates that have been keeping this story and this fire alive. If people do not tell the stories, if we do not understand where we've come from, we can never chart a new path to go forward. And it was a shocking experience, shocking learning experience to know about this community for the first time, although it wasn't surprising. It wasn't surprising when you understand the history of where we've come from, and that's why we've built our housing plan on the real history of Vancouver. We built our housing plan on the real history of Vancouver, and the 91-year-old, thank you so much, you're too kind. It's all right. The 91-year-old, thank you so much, I really appreciate it. The 91-year-old plan written by Harlan Bartholomew, who was an American segregationist and sort of classist. And he wrote that plan in conjunction with a man named James Payton. James Payton was a Vancouver City Councillor and later became an MLA here. He was also the head of the Ku Klux Klan. His house was the Canuck House. And there's a picture in the Vancouver Archives of them all in the foyer with their hoods on and having a meeting. And these were the people that wrote The very first plan. This is the plan that we've been functionally working with since 1927. Our objective is to do away, once and for all, after decades and decades and decades of talking about it, do away with the Bartholomew Plan and do a new community plan that makes sense for the 21st century based on our values for our time. And we're going to make sure that we rehumanize our neighborhoods. Because there's a reason why Chinatown exists and Hogan's Alley existed and Japantown existed. It was segregation. And our future is not going to be our past. We must come together. We need a new plan. We need to work together. And every neighborhood needs to look like us.
The next question is going to look at the Chinatown situation and the future of Chinatown, and this is going to be read by Vince.
Hey, so first of all, we should address that the Chinese seniors are not in this room at the moment. We do not have, the city of Vancouver has not reached out to the Chinese community. They have excluded the Chinese elders and seniors and low-income peoples for decades now. And it is conspicuous that they're not here at the moment to talk to the people that are going to be our elected leaders. And so I would really like to, first of all, counter the idea that I don't think that Chinatown is starting to look a lot like you, Hector Bremner, because there are a lot of rich folks moving into the neighborhood. And so all this talk about we are all neighbors, we're all friends, the people of the downtown east side and Chinatown don't feel that way about all the people moving in with property and new businesses, gluten-free places. And so I would really like to ask the question of how are you going to make sure that the Chinese seniors and low-income people, the elders, have a voice in this city? How are you going to protect their livelihoods, their homes? Like grocery stores where they shop, where they can speak their language and live their damn lives, they're disappearing, like by the day. Chinatown is changing and the people are still here. They're not in this room. They're out on the streets picking up cans, trying to make a living. Yet, they have no participation in the democratic process, and meanwhile, their homes are being destroyed, they're being replaced with condos, they're people that look like Hector Bremner. So I'd really like to ask, what are you going to do for the Chinese elders and the low-income people living in Chinatown? Thank you.
Here's one. 大家好，我是 Fred， 我是中文律师，我会说一点普通话。我的普通话不是的。That means I speak a little Chinese because I'm very committed to the Chinese community and I've been working with the Chinese community for a long time. That is part of the reason that when you go onto the Vancouver Sun website and you look at if you vote for the mayor today, who's it going to be? You will see that our party and myself have surged to the lead. We have surged to the lead.
Where?
So, in the Vancouver Sun.
What poll?
It's the poll. So, I agree. I agree with Kennedy, who stepped aside so that a person of color can take his place in Parliament. It is a noble and honorable thing to do, and I'm looking forward to him saying something in my ear in about 5 minutes as well, that he's about to step to the side again, because it's about time. It's about time we had representation. But I'm not going to go on to that right now because the question's about Chinatown. I had a meeting this morning with a very senior leader of the Chinatown community. I've been meeting with people who are involved in the Chinatown community for the last 2 to 3 months. I'm meeting all the time and talking about what do they want. But there is a split in what people of Chinatown want. I can tell you, the woman I met with today, or one of the people I met with today, comes from Shaughnessy, and she drives to Chinatown to make sure she buys her groceries in the stores here. She wants those shops to succeed. She wants this community to thrive. I want this community to thrive. The shops, the commerce, the people must be respected. There are issues around development of Chinatown, and it's not easy. The Chinatown, not gentrification, but re-energizing committee started in 2002. 16 years ago, and they've still got no resolution. That's what the political class think of Chinatown. I will not take that stand. We're going to take action immediately in making sure that Chinatown gets the re-energizing that it absolutely needs, and the community are respected in what they look for.
Thank you very much for the question. So this morning I had before I came here, I had a press conference with Jenny Kwan and announced 3 strong measures to address the question exactly that you're asking. This is developed through consultation with teams of folks that Jenny has put together over the last few months. Jenny and I, of course, known each other for a long time in politics, but I had the privilege of sitting with her in the House of Commons, and she's a fantastic representative for this community. So the first thing that I said today is that I would work with the province and the federal government to bring UNESCO heritage status to Chinatown. And that's so important because it conserves what's here, but then, and the great thing about UNESCO heritage status is that you discover all kinds of new things. That teams come in and they help you rediscover the history, but also uncover new things. So UNESCO designation is one part of it. The second is to have a specific Chinese-Canadian museum here so that we can recognize and promote the history to make sure that that is something that we remember forever, but also it will bring new recognition to the contribution that Chinatown has made to our society into Vancouver. The third is to work with local merchants and to have a food street. So we would be having a food street as well. Now that is, it sounds all surfacey, but a previous announcement with Libby Davies was to have an emergency task force on the downtown east side, and that would have to include, of course, all members of the community, including the Chinese community. That's so important to these neighborhoods. So those are 4 concrete measures that I've announced with good support, good consultation, and as mayor, I would put those in place. Thank you.
So I saw an article the other day that Raymond Louie, who is organizing a lot of the Chinatown stuff for the rezoning, the tower rezoning, is now angling for a job with the developers. So he's paid his dues to them by getting the rezoning that's put all the condos in Chinatown that have basically destroyed its character and pushed out a lot of low-income people. So what would COPE do? We support the People's Vision for Chinatown that was developed by the Chinatown Concern Group and the Chinatown Action Group, and calls for more social housing at pension rate and no more condos until we get enough of that social housing. It also supports building community facilities that low-income Chinese seniors and other people can afford. And we support funds for translation at all community events. We also need, in order to help the businesses, we need a rent freeze on small businesses, and also we need progressive property taxes so that smaller businesses pay a lower tax rate than people like Walmart or Canadian Tire. We need to protect tenants in Chinatown from the gentrifying impact that St. Paul's is going to have. That's got to be a first priority of a new council. And no new condos until we get enough social housing for everybody. And a consultation process that actually includes low-income Chinese seniors and people of all ages, of course. And lastly, social housing and community facilities at 105 Kiefer that the Chinese community has fought so hard and so bravely for, and so pitifully for.
Thanks, Jean. One of the things I want to talk about specifically is we've got small businesses that are hurting really badly. And part of that is because of the zoning that we've done, where we've said we're going to build up on arterials, we're going to put housing, and we basically created a situation where all of our small businesses are getting taxed out and their rents have gone up so much that they're moving out. So you're seeing this happen in almost every heritage part of our community, specifically and very badly here in Chinatown. I've already been working on this. I've met with the cabinet minister. I've already been having the conversation is, can we create a new, it's getting a bit technical, a new assessment category for small businesses, and specifically small local businesses, so that they are not assessed at the same level that high commercial businesses are. That will enable us as a city council to determine a very different mill rate, which could save a lot of these small businesses. I also want to revisit the idea of putting residentials on arterials, take them off the arterials so that we can save those small businesses in those heritage communities. I also think in terms of the Chinese community, we actually have seen a real vibrant voice coming from the community. I've certainly heard it in the last few years. It hasn't been a difference for me. I haven't heard it as loudly 5 years ago. I'm hearing it more, and it's a demanding voice, which is great, because what that does is create the space within City Hall to say, we are going to do things differently here. And so the consultation process can be done differently here. It can be demanding that there is language translation, that there are people working in the languages, facilitating, convening, so it's not all through translation. So there's a lot of things that we can do at City Hall to actually create a more level playing field for a real consultation, a real community planning process that puts the needs of those in the seniors. I've also done a whole platform on seniors. It was the third platform I put out. I won't go into it because I've got out of time, but it is there, and it's very much about providing for seniors housing.
I love how Fred does the language thing, that's great, but I do think that you were speaking Mandarin.
Can you use a mic, please?
Oh, you're recording it. Oh, okay. So, I lived in this neighborhood for 30 years, and I know that most folks in the Chinese community don't actually speak Mandarin, but they speak Cantonese and Khoisan and Hakka, and it's my neighborhood, and I love this neighborhood, and I've stepped up and gone to bat for Chinatown many times, be it 105 Kiefer or the various different planning initiatives, making sure that we're using granular store frontages and stuff. And I even took an uncomfortable position in my own neighborhood in Strathcona when we realized that the seniors that had been pushed out by the very new population in Strathcona had nowhere to go. So we're now enthusiastically supporting, I got my community behind me, and we're enthusiastically supporting a new purpose-built seniors facility at the Villa Cathay at the corner of Campbell and Union, which is going to be about 11 stories, which, if you know neighborhood politics, an 11-story building in a residential, low-scale neighborhood is a big deal. And the community's 100% behind it. It's so important that we honor our Chinatown community, and, the Renaissance that somebody else mentioned, the Renaissance is so crucial because what it says is that Chinatown is just as part of the beginnings of the city that we know as Vancouver, this colonial city. The Chinese people helped build it. They have every right to be here. And when we get into these conversations about race and money laundering and foreign investment and stuff, it's really important to contextualize that Chinese people helped build this city. And those elders helped save our community in Strathcona when they fought the freeway. We need to honor them. We need to keep the businesses alive. It broke my heart when Chinatown Supermarket closed because that's like the second to last grocery store that really services my friends and family, and we need to do better for Chinatown. So,
I want to say thanks to Pete for actually acknowledging what the cultures actually are in Chinatown. Khoisan, Taiwanese, Cantonese. None of these languages are actually taught in our schools anymore. So we have to be very careful about trying to protect those cultures. It's interesting because I was in Dollar Meat the other day, and there's two footprints right at the ordering counter where they're chopping the barbecued duck and the barbecued sausage. And I stood there with my son, and I realized 40 years earlier, I was standing right there with my mother. You don't realize how important protecting these businesses are. I know the media's mocked me before, but I'm sorry, it's Chinatown. It's not Spaghetti Town, it's not Coffee Town, it's not anything like that. We need to give preference to the Asian businesses to try to keep it alive, but also we need to go to welfare and pension rate only through the rental zone only, zoning that the province has now given the city the right to do. And we also have to bring stall parking. I talked to the merchants there, and they've actually said, and I remember this as a kid, there were a lot of stall parks around, and that's where everybody was fighting to find that parking spot so they could go shop in Chinatown. They hate parallel parking. If we can bring that back, we can revitalize. This is not just about cutting costs. We have to drive business back to there, and we have to keep that in mind. We have to keep in mind what the cultures are there. We have to keep in mind what types of businesses are there,
and we have to keep in mind what we can do to make it easier for the customers to come back. Thank you.
Chinatown. For me, it's interesting because I grew up in Langley. I was born in Vancouver, and my father's family comes from Toisan and through way of Hong Kong and fleeing Chairman Mao. And Chinatown was one of the ways in which I actually got to connect with my culture. So I recently told my dad that I was learning a bit of Cantonese, and his reaction was actually shocking to me because he said, "Why are you learning such an ugly language?" And for a first-generation immigrant, that's what was beaten into him when he moved to Langley, was that that's not the language you speak, this is not your culture. And for me, being able to come to Chinatown and still go to Maxine's or Goldstone, where we used to go with my grandma every Sunday, is important to me. And it's a personal story that I share because I think that these spaces have personal stories and we need to talk about them. And so the realistic things that you can do around Chinatown are being done by groups already, and we need to support those groups. Groups like the Hua Foundation, groups like Youth Collaborative for Chinatown. Those folks are the voices that are bringing generations together, and that needs to happen more, and the city needs to support them. It's been great for me to be able to enjoy the events that they put on. I'm also part of the Choi Box, get Chinese veggies every Sunday, and talking about things like tax rates on small businesses, legacy businesses, how we can support those legacy businesses, because the grocers in Chinatown aren't just a grocer, they're a network. And once those go, that affects actually a whole chain of different cultural institutions. Thinking about translation at consultation, that's a no-brainer. Our elders need to be able to participate in decisions that affect them. And that's definitely something that I'm really eager to support. Anyways, that's for me.
The third, on the top 3 priorities that we talk about in this campaign and the MPA's plan going forward is seniors. Ken Sim is our mayoral candidate. He started a company called Nurse Next Door. The company has been in business for almost 20 years, and their primary focus is how to keep seniors at home or living where they choose to live and ensuring that care is available. So yes, that's the organization that he started, just sharing where that's coming from. So where we are prioritizing our focus is around culturally sensitive services for all, and particularly in this area. It's really, really important that people know that they can access services that meet the needs based on their ethnic background in all areas, but especially in Chinatown. One thing that has been touched on a number of times is a small business. And from a personal experience, when I was young and started my adult working life, it was actually a small business that took a bit of a chance on me. I was already pregnant, said I need time off in 9 months. And they said, we'll bring you on anyway. And I ended up working there for 13 years. It gave me everything that I needed. These small businesses are not hiring senior managers or fancy resumes. They're hiring everyday, regular people that need a job. So for that reason, I believe Vancouver, the municipal government needs to prioritize taking care of these businesses one way or another. For sure, best use tax is totally unfair, and it needs to be addressed at a municipal, or putting pressure up to at a provincial level at BC assessment. But at the end of the day, we have to remember, what do these businesses actually do for the communities that they're in, and make that the #1 priority.
We had a really robust conversation last Saturday, with Success and in Chinatown. And this question invariably came up, and what are we going to do to save Chinatown? And what are we going to do to ensure that Chinatown survives, that is not, as Vince mentioned, it's not this a fake Chinatown. How do we salvage that? How do we save that? I recognize that one of the first things I got to work on as a staffer in Victoria was the historic wrongs apology to Chinese Canadians. And I traveled the province and sat through 8 cities and 4 or 5 hours at a time of really raw and emotional testimony, and helped develop a curriculum afterwards that was going into our schools and program of recognizing historic sites, and Chinatown was one of those. The UNESCO plan is great, but it's going to take a very, very long time potentially to achieve, if we achieve it. So what do we do in the near term? So in the near term, what I'm really proud to say is that I'm very proud of our team members, Glennis Chan and Phyllis Tang. Phyllis Tang has worked for and been a senior coordinator at the Dr. Sun Yat-sen Center, and also Glennis is a Chinese senior who's operated business in Chinatown for 38 years. She's also headed numerous clan societies and nonprofits in not only the downtown east side, but Chinatown. She will take this on, they will take this on as members of the community, as the language speakers, as the knowledge keepers, those that are members of the community. And they will lead a new community engagement and develop a new plan that will guarantee that we have split assessments for our businesses to make sure that nonprofits and business are not paying this inflationary residential tax rate. And we're going to stabilize the area. We're going to have a revitalization plan that doesn't rely just on condos, but real jobs, tourism, and arts and culture. Thank you.
Thanks, Hector. The next question is going to be by Priscilla on behalf of Downtown Eastside Women's Center.
Happy Denise Zakis, I'm Gitsan Matsorin, and as a single mom, Aboriginal, I want to ask, how are you prepared to support single parents with daycare and backpack programs, and women and male fleeing domestic violence?
Start from here.
Okay, what are we going to do for single parents and women and men fleeing domestic violence? Okay. 400, 900, 1300. My good friend here says that make the places smaller. No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean anything to the soul. I'm talking about what is affordable rent. Affordable rent. Nowhere have I ever described or discussed that if we make this affordable rent, we're going to make the places smaller. Remember the first thing I told you? I grew up poor. The poor and the marginalized are not going to be stiffed by me. That's number one. So by making affordable rent is the first thing. At 400, 900, 1300, that is affordable. It's really important in terms of domestic violence and people who are fleeing domestic violence. I want to just say a couple of things. 15 years ago, I started a rally on the North Shore, and I did it in conjunction with Doris Paul and the Squamish Nation, and we had people walking from North Vancouver to West Vancouver to honor the victims of sexual abuse and domestic violence. 15 years, and I came back and I was there in July. I'm now retired from policing, obviously, but I was there in July. We did our 15th walk, because we have to respect and honor the people who are suffering from domestic violence. 3 years ago, I created the very first domestic violence program in the province. Believe this or not, in the province that actually had a First Nations component. There was not one in the province of British Columbia. I'm well aware of the work that needs to be done about domestic violence. And I'll say this, despite the obvious issues going on with the Vancouver Police Department and the community, I took instruction and direction and leadership from the Vancouver Police Department's Domestic Violence Unit. I will say that they are one of the best in the world at what they do in Domestic Violence Unit. You have to see the work that they do to believe it, and the cases that they deal with will shock people in this room. I will support people fleeing from domestic violence. I will support making sure that women and men are free from domestic violence.
Well, thank you, and I think Vancouver, we've talked about a lot of important issues today, but actually this touches on, I think, the one that strikes me most deeply is that we've had a mass murder in this community. We've had many, many women go missing and murdered here, and we never talk about it as a community. You know, essentially women were harvested by murderers in the downtown east side and then just butchered, and we never talk about it as a community. This is very, very disturbing, and I think it's a failure and it's a deep shame for Vancouver. So this is, but it all is attached to how we don't take domestic violence seriously, how we don't stand up for women, and that's what we have to do here. And it starts with the measures you're talking about. It starts with recognizing domestic violence and putting supports in place to make sure women can get away from this and get protection with children too. And it's staggering to me that we don't talk more about this. So it does start with housing, with supportive housing. It supports with a police force that respects. I mean, we knew this was going on, and then we did nothing about it. So I find it very difficult that we continue to not discuss this and do more about it. And as mayor, I would. I do think it's something that touches me deeply. It's something that this community feels right down to its toes, because this is where this happened. And so we have to start with the proper supports, and it does start with housing. It's all the projects we've been talking about here, all the things that the city has to do. This is where it starts. And then this community is fantastic. I used to work at the Raycam Community Center. I was scared to go there. I mean, I was from rural Nova Scotia. I come here, I don't know, it's a big, scary city. And I was so surprised how supportive the community is. It's the best community in the city. So, but this community also has the most pressure. And we need to make sure that we support it as a city government, and I'll do that as mayor. Thank you for your question.
February 14 March, just to commemorate the missing and murdered women in the downtown east side. So I hope to see you guys there this February.
Sure will.
Yeah, so some people, Diane wrote a book called The Soul of Vancouver, which is this neighborhood, right? The Soul of Vancouver. So I've been on the end of the phone a lot of times when women call me up and they say, what is the welfare rate? And I say what it is, and they say, oh, okay, I better stay. So there's a huge problem with women who can't flee domestic violence because the welfare rate is so unbelievably low. And that is one thing that really has to get dealt with immediately. And I am committed, and as is COPE, to putting as much pressure as we possibly can on the province to do that. Then, of course, we have to help women who do leave, and we need all kinds of support services. But we also need housing that they can afford, folks. Rent freeze. We need a rent freeze. We need social housing. Some of that modular housing needs to be for women and children. And we need to get it up fast. And we could have it, we can have it for Indigenous people too. We could have special cultural stuff happening in it. That would be great. In terms of daycare, COPE supports making Vancouver a pilot city for $10 a day daycare. Yeah. And using a gender lens on all policies at the school, park, and council level, and using the schools for education to start preventing the gender violence from happening in the first place.
Applauding. I'm so glad the Downtown Eastside Women's Center exists. I remember when it didn't, and I remember helping on the fundraising when Lucy Alderson and others were doing it. So, and Crabtree Corner, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. I was talking to Franz Emmanuel of the Women's Health Collective the other day, and I said, you know, Franz, and I kept sort of saying, if you did this, and you did this, and you did this, and she looked at me and she said, Shauna, I'm the only person that works here. I went, oh my God. So I sat down and I wrote a 6-point agenda to the federal government to see if I could unlock some thinking. First, let's redefine infrastructure so we include social infrastructure. Let's get the federal government, the provincial government, and our city government really advocating for the $10 a day daycare. But I also want that daycare to be, I don't need, if I have income, I shouldn't be getting $10 daycare. I want that money going to where it's really needed. I want welfare rates up, I want housing rates up. Excuse me. The other thing is, we've got a whole situation where it's largely women on the front line of social services in this neighborhood. They are getting drained. How much can we expect? The same group of women, the same group of volunteers to go over and over again. We're not putting supports into the intermediary or groups that will support those women. Yes, we need to put counseling services, support services, and more money into the funding of women's centers and women's organizations. That's a no-brainer, and we used to have it. We used to have it, but we've got a federal government that stepped away from that. They've made promises, well, let's get them back on their promises. I have worked for 30 years with the federal government. I used to spend a month, every month I would be in Ottawa advocating. I know how to get on the phone and advocate. I know how to move things forward. And I think these are things where we have solutions and we can move. And you need a mayor that puts women's issues front and center of my analysis of how we govern. It's been 132 years. For God's sakes, can we have a woman as mayor?
There's so much to unpack there, you know, but I mean, I think first and foremost, for women fleeing domestic violence, we need to, like treatment on demand, we need to have options that are available immediately to transition out of a bad situation, and we don't do that now, and we need to do that more, and that could apply to a variety of situations. On the subject of childcare, of course, we're right on the end of losing the Phil Bouvier Family Center, which is over at Princess and Georgia. And you know, that's been a case of chronic mismanagement. It was over 80 spaces of childcare when Raycam was running it. It's been whittled down to 40, and now they're talking about closing it. And we need to hold the city of Vancouver accountable, because when they purchased that property from the St. Francis Xavier, they purchased that and helped the Central City Foundation purchase it with a strict covenant that it was supposed to stay as childcare until 2026. And they're allowing it to close. So we need to actually step up and make sure the city retains that commitment to keep accessible childcare in the downtown east side. You know, so I mentioned that I do work at Raycam. I'm there every week, and we're talking about like collective impact strategies, because we see these systems that are treating people like clients, and they're not clients, they're people. And we need to centralize our services around the people who are receiving them. So VPD, Coastal Health, school board, everybody, we need a coordinated approach that really puts people in the center of it, not just metrics or analytics. And we have such a long way to go. We do a quarterly Youth Matters session, which really brings a lot of these players together. And last week we had Paige's auntie come and talk. And for those of you who don't know about the Page report, there's like a little girl who died. We can do better.
Pete's right, we can do better. You know, the challenge is that I've talked to a lot of single moms in our community, the ones that are marginalized, and there aren't enough emergency shelters. She's told me she's been there, and they've had 16 single moms with children away. That's a lot. We have challenges with even the ministry. We have single moms that are afraid to report because they're worried the ministry is going to take their kids. It's got to change. Same thing with Aboriginal services. Same problems popping up all the time. I hear it all the time as PAC chair. That's got to change. The thinking's got to change. Yes. We need to have the backpack programs. We need to actually have breakfast, lunch, and dinner programs. Because the number one thing is that the kids are fed and they stay in school, they can break the cycle. But if we don't help them do that, it'll keep perpetuating itself. And that needs to end. So I'm all for that. I'm all for providing that. I also know that we've got a challenge right now because with the school board, they're only signing 2-year leases for space for childcare. And the problem with the childcare givers is they're saying, how can we take this on? In 2 years, we're going to have to kick the kids out because we can't guarantee the space. So we need longer term leases. We need that space. And actually, because of the cost of living here, we even talked about in our group, we need longer hours of childcare. We got shift workers that don't have help. This is becoming a new reality. We've got teachers that are actually working secondary jobs. And I asked them, are you doing this for kicks or are you doing this to stay alive? The answer is the latter. We need to protect everybody. Women are the cornerstone to families. When things go wrong, kids go with them. We've got to protect them, because without doing that, the whole system falls apart. Thank you.
A couple things to start. Just to acknowledge there are 2 points around trans women are women and sex work is work. And so our service is also to acknowledge that as well when it comes to women who are fleeing violence or fleeing domestic abuse, that they also need services and also make sure that they can feel safe to report. And we've heard in the media currently around sexual assault and abuse, and women who are relatively privileged who also are afraid to report. And we have folks who, I know in my community, who are trying to leave a partner, but they can't because if they do, they pay double the rent somewhere else. And that's acceptable. So we talk about housing as a way. Our school board trustee candidates, Carrie Bursick, Jennifer Reddy, and Eric Jaff have put together a really great plan. We've endorsed the $10 daycare plan to ensure that young women have access to affordable childcare. And thinking about also the other pieces that are cost people, we also have endorsed the all-on-board plan to make transit free for everyone under age 18, and also a sliding scale for folks on income assistance as well. And so thinking about the main parts of someone's spending, it's around housing, it's around transportation, it's around childcare. And so if we can make a dent in those things, I think we can also help lots of women in the city, and also supporting a lot of the services that are kind of pushed to the side because their service structure doesn't meet some funders' understanding of what help is. And so I'll use my experience coming from the Vancouver Foundation, applying that lens to supporting these organizations that support women, Aboriginal women who are seeking services but need culturally relevant services as well. Because that's also important. Our culture is important, it's who we are, it's how we take care of each other, and it's also how we heal. And so we need to be supportive of those things.
So I look at this, it's not just an issue, it's so much bigger than that. And really what permeates it is the stigmatization that happens around those that have gone through any type of domestic violence. But not just domestic violence, there's a certain level of pride in those people that are marginalized and find themselves in situations that they really don't know how to get themselves out of. I don't have a lot of stats and facts. I'm learning all that stuff. I have a really personal relationship to this topic. My son came home from school last year. He was so excited. He met a new friend. He really, really liked him. He said, "Can we have him over for the weekend?" I said, "Absolutely. Get his address. We'll go pick him up." My son has learned disabilities. He was in a cross-boundary school. We make the plan. I get a call from the school, and they said, "Look, we just need you to know where you're going to go to pick this little guy up." And I said, "Okay." They said, "Probably it's never any place you've ever been before." And I said, "Well, how? Okay, tell me." "Well, he lives at Campbell and East Hastings, behind Ray Camp Community Center. He lives in social housing. If you go up to the door, I just want you to be prepared." And I was so offended by this warning that was coming from absolutely the best place, that is stigmatization right there. And how many people would have canceled or not done it because they were afraid of some sort of unknown that was presented in that way. We picked up the little guy, and he's a great kid. He's super smart. He's also going cross-boundary to be a part of this same program. He's my son's best friend. We get him all the time, and he comes over, and we go play, and we do things, and his mom is part of our life, part of our family, and I'm only sharing that story because it's real, because it's really what our life is about. And I just believe that we need to notice when we start to stigmatize and divide people and stop seeing them as people, but start seeing them as the problems that they are, and they're just not those problems, they're real people.
So we've heard a lot of solutions, we've heard a lot of talk, we've kind of blended things between three levels of government, but I just want to focus back on the original question, and of course we're running for City Hall. As someone who's actually at City Hall now and as a Vancouver City Councilor, I can tell you the number one I experience from organizations, nonprofits, staff, healthcare providers in the downtown east side and throughout the city is red tape. Get out of our way. Get out of our way. Just dealing the other day with a healthcare provider just over on Powell, a few blocks away. They were trying to get a new medical clinic open. They were forced to close down. The building was being redeveloped. They needed to move over. If I had not stepped in, the permits would not have happened. They would have had 485 patients without health care that need every day to see their doctor. It's red tape. We're just not understanding that we have a choice between saying no or yes. Daycare is a great example. Daycare in the city of Vancouver, we actually, in the city bylaws, we have never pushed the province back on this. We operate on suburban bylaws. We operate on these arbitrary bylaws of how many footsteps it is to a park, and you can't be so many flights of stairs up. It's ridiculous. We are an urban community. But we have been living with these suburban rules that we can never live up to. Red tape, the lack of focus, the lack of a nonprofit office within the city of Vancouver to make sure that projects of critical need are prioritized. That has been an opportunity in front of us for years, but we've said no. We've shuffled our feet. But I think there's a new day here. There's a new opportunity, and there's an opportunity for us to stop playing politics with these issues and just get the job done. Thank you.
Thanks, Sept. Before we conclude, we'd like to give the mic to our downtown east side roller girl mayor to speak for 1 minute.
Hi, my name is Angela Dawson. I'm Roller Girl Vancouver. I've been an advocate for 17 years downtown east side and around the Vancouver area. Please vote for me because I'll make a difference. Because I already in history, I'll make a difference again. History has always repeated itself, so please vote for Roller Girl. I mean what I say. Being homeless as a trans woman, okay, and get hate crimes everywhere I go, everywhere I've lived, I get hate crimes. All my belongings is gone. And all I have right now to survive on is my clothing line. It's right here right now. This is my soul. I live the life. I don't sit at a desk and I go out there, direct traffic. I save many, many people's lives. So please vote for me, Roller Girl, for mayor.
Thank you, Roller Girl. Our next speaker is John Yano. 1 minute.
Thank you. I'm very glad to have this opportunity to speak to you. I very much support a rent rollback by building enough rental housing so that there is a vacancy rate between 5 and 7%, with a moratorium on upzoning for market residential condos until such time that that is achieved. I think the only way that we will have an affordable city is to ensure that we have affordable rental housing. Also, I will insist that we create zoning for community amenities so that vital community amenities are not taxed at the same rate as if they were built to the maximum capacity of market condos. That's ridiculous. We need community amenity tax category or zoning. We also need enduring support for a sustainable future. We need to look at everything with an environmental lens, with a community lens. We need strong, environmentally sustainable communities.
Thank you, John. This concludes our afternoon of discussion about how to make our city more livable. I'd like to thank all the candidates who took the time to come and share the views with our audience. I also want to thank our audience for being so diligent and engaging. And so this is it. Thank you very much.
It's a tradition in the downtown east side, wherever we come together, we always take a moment to remember those that fought with us or that were missing in our personal lives. So I would like to dedicate this one to one of our own who passed away 2 weeks ago. Harold Robert, who would be here.
Tracy. Richie.
All my relations, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Mom.